Well, let's look at the source of everything. Let's look at the root. The Old Testament, from the Old Testament, sprouted Judaism, sprouted Christianity, sprouted Islam. That's the source. So let's look at that book. And all three of those religions, I want to say, all have a lot of beauty. There's a lot of distortions as well, but that's what perception is. Perception is distortion. I went back to read it in English, and as I was reading it for myself, beyond the improbable to seemingly impossible metaphysical things, which, again, building a boat that when the earth is flooded and parting the seas and crossing the desert in 40 years, beyond that, what I didn't realize until I read it for myself recently is, so let's look at religion. Let's look at this lineage of the Abrahamic religions, which goes back to the Old Testament. And I had a bar mitzvah when I was a kid. I read from the Torah. I had a Torah portion. I don't remember which one I had. I wasn't super into Hebrew school, but I went a couple times after school, every week for years, had my bar mitzvah, read from the Torah. I learned how to read the words. I learned how to read the characters, but I didn't know the translation. So I essentially could memorize sounds. And I read a Torah portion. I'd have to look it up. I couldn't tell you what it was. I definitely didn't know what it meant. And then after my bar mitzvah, I didn't go to a temple anymore. And, just explore. I was just open to everything and sort of been exploring the past 33 years since. And I came back to Judaism and wanted to see it with some fresh eyes. And when I had kids, I wanted them to be at least as Jewish as I was. There's a lot of that intrinsic Jewish guilt, I think, that comes with similarly with Catholicism as well. The needing to carry on the traditions and the bloodline, but it's very strong for within the Jewish culture for a lot of people. So that my kid's mom is not Jewish, which already is a big no-no for a lot of people, because Jews view the bloodline, the official Jewishness of a kid based on the mother, although Reform Judaism now looks at the paternal line. So even there kind of says we can, make up our own rules for our own clubs, and the more Orthodox Jews don't believe Reform Judaism is legitimate. You can't just pick and choose, but we all pick and choose, and we'll get into that. So my son is turning 13. He actually just turned 13, but he's having his bar mitzvah in a week. They've been going to Hebrew school for a couple of years, and now that he's been training for his bar mitzvah, we've been going back to temple every Saturday. And I haven't gone on Saturdays in a long time. And now we're going like every Saturday. And on Saturday is when you read the Torah. Every Saturday you read a portion of the Torah. And he was reading his Torah portion. He was practicing it. And then we came to speak to the rabbi because the rabbi wanted him to give a little speech on it. What do you think about this Torah portion? What do you take from it? What's your perspective? And he asked him to read it in English and underline or highlight some of the things that stood out. So we went to meet with the rabbi, and my son is highlighting and sharing some of the things. And one of the things in my son's Torah portion that he's reading for his bar mitzvah says, essentially, I'm not exaggerating, I'm not directly quoting, but what it says in effect is that if a child is insubordinate, then the parents have the right to bring him to the town and kill him. Our world is shaped by the stories that we tell around it. Because you could get a message from somebody, and maybe your partner calls and says, hey, I'm running late. I love you. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. That didn't sound really loving. It didn't sound real. And you tell yourself a story that they didn't mean it. Or maybe it's like, oh, you know what, they sound really rushed and stressed, but they love me. It's so sweet for them to say it. How do we know? What story do you tell about it? So what story do we tell about humanity, about life, about everything? And the stories that we tell ourselves are the stories that we live in that base our morality. Because morality is not absolute. Different cultures, different religions, based on there's a morality around what you dress and what you eat and how you treat people and the when you pray and the words that you say and how you pray. All of that falls within a level of morality that is disagreed upon. So there's no absolute truth. There's choice. The absolute truth is all is one, the law is one. And so yet we have so much violence in this world. And even in the animal kingdom, people look at that and think it's violent. It's not violent per se. Animals don't just murder other animals because they're angry. Now you could give me some exceptions. And there's some times when some animals get killed because they fight. But like rhinos aren't going out and just killing gazelles by the thousands. They kill what they want to eat. Sometimes there's killing for taking over some territory. But when they have what they want, they stop. And then everybody goes about their business. That's not the way that our world works. So if we look at the source, what is the source? How far back can we go? And if we look right now, I mean, there's war all over the planet. There's killing all over the planet, but there's the war happening with Israel right now, Palestine and Gaza. There's a war with Ukraine and Russia. But I want to look at the one particularly right now in Israel, because that's the one closest having to do with the Old Testament. Although it's invoked in most wars in some way or another. So we can look and say, well, what is the source of violence? And go back into what our enemies have done or into history of violence, of conquering. But that's not the source. So we can go back into our songs, our governments, but that's not the source. If you keep going back and back and back, the absolute source, you cannot get to any more source than source itself, and source is God. So what does God tell us about violence? The Old Testament is inarguably, whether you subscribe to it or don't subscribe to it, agree with it or don't agree with it, it is inarguably the most violent book that maybe has ever been printed. The amount of humans that have been killed in the Old Testament at the hands of God, of Yahweh, directly or indirectly, is millions. Millions. The amount of animals that were sacrificed and killed and slaughtered and given as burnt offerings to please the Lord is millions. I'm talking about the books from Genesis through Deuteronomy. After we have those 5 books, known as the Torah, but there is also the greater Torah, which is the Tanakh and the Talmud. But after those 5 books, maybe considered the Hebrew Bible, it is definitely part of the Old Testament, along with the different writings that came after that and the prophets such as Jeremiah and Job and Ecclesiastes and of those sorts. And in those writings, there's not as much murder, sacrifice, rape, destruction, punishment, wrath. Those first 5 books really cover it quite a bit. And I never really realized it. And being that I never really realized it, I recognize that most of us never really realized it, or we just kind of step over it in some way. We know the story of like, well, no, there was a flood on the earth. So it's a very, 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 very different story about God from the Old Testament to the New Testament. If it were a show and the first season was the Old Testament and the second season was the New Testament, and you wouldn't believe it was the same character playing God. It was like the ant from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Like the first season was real dark skin, and then all of a sudden Aunt Viv became real light skinned. And you're like, I know that's not the same person. And then you look at the God of the Old Testament, you look at the God of the New Testament, or even with some of the other writings from the prophets, and it's like, that's not the same character. But it's not, I'm not talking just about Jesus. It's a very, very different character from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And we'll cover it. But I want to talk about the source, because as was asked earlier about the source of violence, what is the source of violence on this planet? Well, let's look at the source of everything. Let's look at the root. If the Old Testament, from the Old Testament, sprouted Judaism, sprouted Christianity, sprouted Islam, that's the source. So let's look at that book. And all 3 of those religions, I want to say, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all have a lot of beauty in all of them. There's a lot of distortions as well, but that's what perception is. Perception is distortion, because there's only truth, and anything we perceive is shifted from absolute truth. If you have a whole pizza, say that whole pizza is God, and you just take one slice of that pizza, is any part of that slice not pizza? No. It's all pizza. It's not the whole pizza, but none of it is not pizza. It's the same with everything, because there's just one pizza. There's just one thing. Different clothing, different masks, different perceptions, different stories. And this story, the Old Testament, this Yahweh character that some people believe is God. Some people believe that those writings, that book, is the absolute word of God. And that's kind of what I was taught growing up. And, you start to hear some of the stories and people question, like, wait a minute, did the sea was really parted? I don't believe that, or some of the more metaphysical things, or the whole earth was like, he had an ark. How did he fit all the animals up on there? And so there's some of those questions they could ask, and there's a lot of those. Like, they were 40 years in the desert. The desert wasn't that big. How did it take that long for them to get through? I went back to read it in English, and when you listen to people speak about it or tell stories about it, and the rabbis will speak and share the morals of it, and they're good. I like hearing the stories of people's perceptions and interpretations of it and what it means. Like, what can I take from it? But going through my son's bar mitzvah training, I'm actually going back and reading it, not just trying to read the Hebrew, but like, what is it saying from the source? And as I was reading it for myself, Now, 46, lived a lot of life, felt a lot of God in a lot of different ways. And the God that I know is unconditionally loving, unconditionally forgiving. That is the infinite. Anything else would be sadomasochistic. And then going back to read the Old Testament, and beyond the, improbable to seemingly impossible metaphysical things, which, again, building a boat that when the earth is flooded and parting the seas and crossing the desert in 40 years, beyond that, what I didn't realize until I read it for myself recently is that God is really, really angry and gets really wrathful and jealous and really quick to murder and kill. And it's incredibly violent and incredibly bloody. And I was in a relationship recently with a person who was a certified, bona fide, look it up in the dictionary to see it, narcissist, person that had narcissist personality disorder. And it was, truth be told, by far the most abusive relationship I've ever been in. And I didn't see it. Everybody else saw it, but I didn't see it. I was in it. And when I realized it, because I didn't have context, I didn't have language, I didn't know that word. I knew things were off and it didn't make sense. And I kept giving and I kept making excuses for why the abuse was okay. And I'd be shown love and then it would be taken away. And then I'd be punished. And then I'd be very, very emotionally violent and very controlling, but you don't realize it. And then the love comes, and it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. And I see this reading this book, and it's like, okay, this God character gets pretty angry, um, wants humans apparently to just kill animals all the time in its name. Humans are constantly sacrificing animals. And we say words like sacrifice or burnt offering. If you really think about this, what were they doing? Almost all day long, at least twice a day. They're going and finding a ox or a lamb or a dove, different creatures, and bringing them to the temple and then murdering them. Not like eating them or just killing and burning every day to please God. The fuck? That's one of the things I was like, I realized like, wait a minute, the God that I know wouldn't want me to go and kill animals and give it its blood, show God the blood of an animal I killed to let it know that I appreciated God. That's crazy. It's the most inverted, crazy shit ever. And the book is filled with it. And that's just the animal sacrifice. And now you have the chosen people, the Israelites. And based on the way that he treats them, I don't know how good it is to be chosen. Pretty much put them through hell. And you wonder why Jews and Judaism has become a religion of people that are so resilient. Jews are known for bringing light from the darkness, for overcoming, for finding the good. Why is that? Well, look at the deity that they thought was God. And don't think that they didn't get it. Yahweh killed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Israelites, of the chosen people, for not obeying. And the ones that, some of them that obeyed the most, his most loyal servants, most loyal humans, most loyal Israelites, would do one thing, a small thing wrong, done, killed, boom. I don't remember who it was. It was like Abraham's son or Isaac's sons. I don't remember the names. Aaron's sons. Oh, I think it was Aaron, the high priest Aaron, Moses' brother. So Moses' nephews gave an offering, a prayer to God, but they didn't do it right. So he just killed them. That's not God. And even just saying that right now is something, it's so sacrilegious. I'd be so terrified to do. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And for my son's, his Haftorah, his Torah portion, talks about how parents can take an insubordinate child into the middle of town and kill him. What? What it says. Now, the rabbis over the years, over the centuries, thought this is the word of God. We don't want to kill our children, but God's always right. But we can't call him out on it. How do we extract morality from this? And so they asked questions. And that's why Judaism has become a religion of asking questions and wrestling with God. Why would they have to wrestle with God? They ask questions because they want to know, what does this actually mean? Are we really supposed to kill our children? And then one of the rabbis will say, well, both of the parents need to speak in the same voice. Yes. They have to. And then another rabbi says, they have to be the same height too. Yes, they have to be the same height. We all agree with that. They're basically creating loopholes so that they never have to kill their children while still acknowledging that it's the actual word of God, instead of just saying, nope, we don't agree with that. And so they built a beautiful religion of morality and then give praise to the deity that has done all of the sacrifice, all of the killing, all of the murder, and say thank you. And we bow down and we kiss the book.